November 1st, 1396. St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Flickers with hundreds of candles casting shadows across the Gothic windows. The organ reverberates through the vaulted naves as a royal procession slowly advances down the central aisle. But this isn't an ordinary occasion. It is the wedding of a 6-year-old girl. Isabel of France, the youngest princess in Europe, approaches the altar where Richard II, King of England and a 29-year-old man, awaits her, wrapped in golden silks trailing behind her on the cold stone floor. The child struggles to bear the weight of a crown too large for her head. In mere moments, she will be crowned Queen of England, forging a political alliance that will forever alter the course of two nations. How did such a small child become a pawn in the brutal world of medieval statecraft? To understand the path that led to Isabel's tragic fate, we must look back to 14th century France, where the monarchy was gripped by madness. Isabel was born on November 9th, 1389 at the Louvre Palace, daughter of Charles VI of France and Isabel of Bavaria. She was the fourth daughter of the royal couple, born into a dark era that would shape her life. Her father, Charles VI, suffered from recurring bouts of insanity that began when he was 24. During these episodes, the king failed to recognize his wife or children, believed himself to be made of glass and feared shattering if touched, or ran through the palace screaming at unseen attackers. France was paralyzed by the disorder, ruled by regents locked in power struggles, while the rightful king remained trapped in the prison of his own mind. Isabel's mother, Isabel of Bavaria, was no less controversial. Driven by ambition and lacking scruples, she exploited her husband's condition to secure influence and fortune. Chroniclers of the time described her as immoral and inattentive to her children, indulging in affairs while focusing on politics. To Isabeau, her daughters were bargaining chips in the European marriage market, tools to secure diplomatic leverage. Raised in this toxic environment, young Isabel was surrounded by political turmoil and palace intrigue. France was torn apart by the 100 Years' War with England, infighting between the Armagnacs and Burgundians, and the unending consequences of the king's madness. For a sensitive child, watching her father's mental decline and her mother's cold scheming caused deep emotional wounds that would haunt her for life. In 1396, when Isabel was merely 6 years old, a diplomatic opportunity emerged that would alter her life forever. Richard II of England, weary from long conflict with France, sought a truce to stabilize his fragile rule. After the death of his first wife, Anne of Bohemia, he looked to secure a political marriage that would offer both peace and financial relief. French advisors, led by the Duke of Berry, saw the English proposal as a rare chance. They offered Isabel's hand in marriage, along with a vast dowry of £800,000 and a proposed truce lasting 28 years. For France, drained by war, this was a chance to buy peace at the cost of a child. The negotiations dragged on for months, handled with the cold precision of business deals. French and English diplomats debated details as though Isabel were livestock on a ledger. Her extremely young age, shocking even by medieval norms, became a sticking point. Some English nobles suggested waiting until she turned 12, the customary age for marital consummation. But Richard II was desperate, beset by uprisings, financial strain, and fears of being overthrown. The lure of French gold and temporary peace outweighed concerns over the bride's age. In October 1396, terms were finalized. Isabel would be handed to England as a diplomatic offering, a child sacrificed for political stability. Her departure from France was staged as a grand ceremony meant to dazzle the English envoys gathered at the Louvre Palace. Charles VI, in a rare moment of clarity, wept as he gave his blessing to his daughter. Isabeau of Bavaria, by contrast, treated the event as a successful political transaction, showing little emotion. Isabel herself couldn't comprehend what was happening. To her, the journey to England seemed more like an exciting, temporary trip. She brought along a few toys, her favorite dolls, and a small pet dog that had comforted her at the palace. The entourage that escorted her included hundreds of nobles, servants, and guards entrusted with protecting this priceless cargo. The trip from Calais to London took several weeks and featured elaborate welcomes in every English city along the way. Local leaders tried to outdo one another with lavish receptions for the new queen. Yet Isabel, overwhelmed and tired by the excessive pageantry, often cried and begged to return home. In London, Richard II orchestrated a wedding fit for legend. St. Paul's Cathedral was draped in intertwined French and English fabrics, symbolizing the bond between two nations. Thousands of French imported candles bathed the cathedral in light, and choirs sang in Latin and French. The entire affair was crafted not just for the English court, but for the world to prove that England had secured peace through diplomacy. Richard II portrayed himself as a reluctant yet resolute groom. At 29, he was seen as one of Europe's most cultured monarchs, a patron of the arts and literature. He had deeply mourned his first wife and found marrying a child deeply uncomfortable. Still, political necessity left no room for personal sentiment. Throughout the ceremony, Isabel remained quiet, clearly frightened by the splendor around her. The Archbishop of Canterbury had to kneel to place the ring on her tiny finger as she nervously searched for familiar faces that weren't there. When pronounced Queen of England, she didn't smile, only looked around, lost and increasingly afraid. Life at the English court was softened by Isabel's age. Richard II, to his credit, treated her more like a daughter than a spouse. He arranged for French tutors, allowed her to keep her native customs, and ensured she was raised with appropriate royal dignity. Isabel was given private apartments in Westminster Palace, her own estate, and a retinue of servants tasked with her comfort. But the fragile peace of her young life shattered in September 1399. Richard II, facing rebellion from Henry Bolingbroke, was deposed and later murdered at Pontefract Castle. At just 10 years old, Isabel was a widow, despite never having lived as a wife. Richard's death triggered a crisis for the English crown. Isabel was the queen by marriage, but the union had never been consummated, and she bore no heirs. To complicate matters, her enormous dowry had already been spent, and returning her to France would also mean repaying funds that no longer existed. Henry IV, the new king, initially kept Isabel under house arrest, hoping to use her in future diplomatic talks. The young widow lived in relative luxury at Havering Palace, but was in essence a gilded captive. For 3 years, she fought for her own release. "I write to you in tears," she confessed in one letter to her father, "for I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, without hope of return." Her cries eventually reached Charles VI, who, during a rare moment of mental clarity, demanded her return. In 1401, after drawn-out talks, Isabel was finally sent back to France. But the child who had left at 6 returned as a 12-year-old girl shaped by sorrow and betrayal. The return to the Louvre brought no joy. France remained in turmoil, and her relatives received her not as a long-lost daughter, but as a political complication. Yet Isabel's ordeal wasn't over. In 1405, at 16, she was once again offered in marriage, this time to Charles of Orleans, a young nobleman and poet. However, unlike her first union, this marriage brought her a measure of happiness. Charles was gentle, scholarly, and truly affectionate toward Isabel. At last, she experienced a bond not forged through politics, but nurtured by love. Together, they shared a passion for poetry and art, and Isabel finally knew what it felt like to be cherished as a person rather than as a symbol. But this happiness, too, was fleeting. In 1407, Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and taken as a prisoner. He would remain captive in England for the next 25 years. Once again, Isabel found herself effectively widowed, this time not by death, but by war. She was left alone, dependent once more on the unstable French royal family. Life had stolen from her, for a second time, the rare chance to love and be loved in return. In the following years, Isabel lived quietly at the French court. She turned her attention to charity and the arts, areas where she could still exert a gentle influence. Her early experience as Queen of England had granted her insight into international diplomacy and court politics, which she used discreetly to advise members of the royal family. In 1409, she gave birth to her only child, Jean of Orleans, a daughter who would never meet her father. Motherhood gave Isabel some comfort, but it also carried a bitter undertone. She knew that her daughter would likely face the same fate, used as a political instrument in arranged marriages. Isabel died that same year in 1409 at just 20 years old, following complications from childbirth. Her death barely registered in the chronicles of the time, a quiet ending to a life that had once been engulfed in royal spectacle. It was a stark contrast to the grandeur that had defined her wedding at St. Paul's. Isabel of France had fulfilled every expectation placed upon her. She secured political alliances, produced an heir, and played her part in the vast machinery of European diplomacy. Yet, at no point was she allowed to live for her own sake. Her story forces us to ask unsettling questions about the treatment of women, especially noble girls in the medieval political order. Isabel's life was not hers to live. From the moment she could walk, her fate was dictated by the ambitions of men and the power struggles of kingdoms. She was treated less as a person than as a movable asset in the chess game of European politics. 600 years later, Isabel's tragedy still echoes, a chilling reminder of the enduring cruelty of child marriage and the exploitation of innocence for political gain. Her life compels us to face the reality that for much of history, children were not protected, but used, offered up to secure fleeting treaties, to heal rifts between kings, or to bolster dynastic claims. Isabel of France, given away at 6 as part of a diplomatic exchange, never experienced a true childhood. From the moment she stepped into the cathedral at St. Paul's, her life belonged to others. She became a queen not out of destiny or choice, but because politics demanded it. Isabel's short and sorrowful life stands as a haunting emblem of the vulnerability of children in the face of unchecked power. Her memory reminds us that behind every treaty, every arranged union, and every royal ceremony in the chronicles of history, there were children like her, sacrificed, forgotten, and voiceless. The little girl who became queen paid the highest possible price for a moment of peace. Between two rival nations, her happiness, her freedom, and ultimately, her life.